Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It's me, Joey P, Joe Pisapia. That is Mike Tagliere, and today's Wisdom Wednesday is all about one thing: finding the perfect league for you, because you want your fantasy football experience to be a good one after all. So much of it, I think, starts with finding the right people and the right format. We're going to kind of get into those different formats today, kind of talk up the things that we like, the things we recommend, and maybe the things to stay away from as well, especially maybe the pitfalls of running a league too, which can be a very difficult thing sometimes. But Tags, I know you probably have every single league that you're in is probably the perfect league for you, right? Because you just want to play.
No, it's not. It's absolutely not. But that's part of the thing, is that we've gone through it. I've played enough leagues to figure out the advice to give to people in terms of, like, if you're looking to get into fantasy football, or if you're looking to broaden your horizons, there's many different things that you can get into, and it really just depends on your time commitment, your level of commitment, how much you want to know about the game. Do you want to further your knowledge, or is this just a friendly competitive league? There's a lot of different things that go into it.
Yeah, and look, I know for you and I too, we also try to play in leagues because we cover all the different formats and everything. Like, I have IDP leagues. I have other leagues that I want to play in. For those of you who don't even know what IDP is, individual defensive player, I play in a roto football league, and I'm somebody that hates roto style baseball where you're chasing categories. But I actually love roto football. Why? Because you could have massive injuries at running back and things like that, but if you have IDP guys who are getting sacks, you have quarterbacks playing well, wide receivers playing well, you can stay relevant. So there's a lot of different formats and a lot of different things. And I want to start with your favorite format and mine. So at this point in your life, when you think fantasy football, what is your ideal? What's the format that you like playing in the most, that brings you the most passion for the game?
Me personally, I like playing in PPR formats. I tell people that it's more predictable, and I understand that there's some downfalls to that. You can say, well, if a running back catches 5 balls for 5 yards, it shouldn't be worth as much as someone scoring a touchdown or whatever. No. That's a rare occurrence where that happens. But the idea is, again, to become more predictable, because I want the most skilled fantasy football player to win, the one that's most prepared. And I can more accurately predict that a player is going to have 6 catches for 65 yards than I can a player that's going to have 1 catch for 70 yards. You know what I mean? So the standard leagues there's a reason that they've kind of fallen into the past. I like full PPR. If you want to do a good middle ground, it's half. 12-team leagues. 10-team is way too small. 10-team, it basically comes down to which team stayed the healthiest the longest, because you just need studs on your team, and that's really what it is. 12-team is a good balance, because 14 teams, you get a little bit...
You get into the weeds. The replacement value on the waiver wire is tough. I think we can all agree on that.
And it's tougher on beginner players too. So it's trying to figure out a good balance for most people. And I think most people would go towards a 12-man league. And again, this all comes down to, do you want a friendly league where it's like you guys are able to pick up players? It's just a work league or something like that. Then you don't have to start a whole lot of players. You do 1 quarterback, 2 running back, 2 wide receivers, 1 flex, 1 tight end, and you only have maybe 5 bench spots, because then that means there's a lot of talent on the waiver wire. In my leagues, the ones that I like to play in, the more players, the better. If you are looking to separate yourselves from your league mates, if you are looking to say, hey, I feel like I'm the best fantasy football player, but it's not showing. It's like I always lose in the playoffs, or I have 1 injury in it, whatever. The deeper the league, the better. So what I mean by that, 12-team league, 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 2 flex spots, and a tight end. And then you do like 6 or 7 bench spots, even 8 if you want to, because the more starting spots you have on the roster, the more that depth is important. The more, even if someone walks into a sleeper pick that they're like, wow, how did you predict that? It's not going to carry their team, because it's just a very small portion of their starters. So if you have 10 starters, you have to have depth. If it's a league where you have like 7 starters, obviously 1 player can carry you more than they typically would. So the deeper the roster, the better. So it really just comes down to understanding what the purpose of your league is. Is it that work league just for fun, and you just want to have a good time? You want to be able to pick up players off the waiver wire, or is it ultra competitive and you want your talent to shine?
Well, look, not everybody has a lot of friends, and it's very difficult sometimes to fill a deeper league. So if you can't, I'd rather play with 10 people that really are excited to play than 12 or 14 when you get to that 2, 3, and 4 last couple owners that really aren't as into it necessarily. And here's what you do. You go to 2 flex, you go to 2 quarterback, you make the rosters deeper to make it more challenging for yourselves. So it's okay to play in a 10-team league. There's nothing wrong with that. But make it a 2 QB format where you have to start 2 quarterbacks every week, where you have to start at least 2 flexes every week, so that you're going further into the pool, so you're challenging yourself with the knowledge of the pool. And as Tags is saying appropriately too, I think widening your horizons a little bit also to what the player pool looks like that particular season, and that's important. Now, for me, I'm Mr. Superflex. I like my fantasy to mirror the game, and there's no more important position than quarterback, so having that super flex possibility where I can start 2 quarterbacks every week if I choose, I think is huge. I never understood why we were in this position where you have quarterbacks who are scoring 200-something points sitting out there on waiver wires in single QB leagues, just rotting away, wasting away, and we're all fighting over running backs who are barely scoring 100. What are we doing? This is ridiculous. Superflex, it solves all of those problems. Plus, I also like that it opens it up to different philosophies of drafting and roster construction. You can go still with the traditional, let's figure out the running backs and wide receivers and wait on QB. You can go the opposite. Build up QB right away, have a big strength there, a position that's very protected. I love the different philosophies. I love people kind of putting their own stamp on their own rosters, and I think that's very cool. Something that I love the most about Superflex. Going back to your question or your statement earlier, I should say, about the full point PPR and the half point, I kind of want to pick your brain a little bit about that. Do you think one is better than the other? Is the half point PPR the better compromise, or is it really not as fun when you consider like full point PPR is more like the arcade style fantasy football, if you will?
It is. I mean, I know that people want to say that, and some people are like, oh, they do PPR just because they want to see more points on the board. They want to do this and they want to do that. I don't believe that. I believe it's just more predictable. That's what it comes down to for me. It comes down to being able to properly predict that. Because again, you look at 2 extremes. You say PPR and you say standard. Which one's easier to predict? It's definitely PPR. So therefore, if you have some hardcore guys that's like touchdowns should be worth more than this and yada yada, then that's when you kind of go to the middle ground. But it's also understanding, when you're drafting, what makes a difference. And I actually do this, an article every year where I go through and I talk about the difference in scoring and how you should value the flex position in PPR versus half PPR versus standard, because obviously running backs in standard ruled that for a long time. But we're now to the point where wide receivers, if you play in a PPR format, playing wide receivers in your flex it has major benefits if you have the correct players. So it varies. And again, this is where being a commissioner is a tough thing, because you have to try to appease everybody, and not everyone's going to agree. But again, if it's a hyper-competitive league, people will adapt to whatever scoring settings you do. Some people do 0.25 points per carry, and then projections start coming into play, where you have to have a set of projections to understand the proper value of those players. But again, you're getting into the point where these people that do that, those are crazy competitive leagues. If you're just starting, there's no way you should be joining leagues like that, because that means those players know what they're doing, and you're going to have a tough time. And you're probably not even going to like fantasy football if that's the first league you play in. You should start in something like Joe said, like a 10-team league. Some people even start in 8-team leagues. And again, if you go down to those, those ranges, the 8 to 10, if you do that, then you definitely want to increase the starting positions, do the 2 quarterbacks, do 3 running backs, do 4 wide receivers. I mean, there are more fantasy relevant wide receivers than ever before. So starting more positions, again, if you only have 8 diehards and you're like, if we just invite 4 guys in our league that we really don't like or that don't want to play, it's wasting. It makes no sense. So definitely stick with that 8-man or 10-man or whatever it is that you're able to get together, and just deepen the rosters to make it so that you're starting a lot of players to widen that talent gap and make it not so reliable or dependent on studs in your roster.
And I know we have a lot of female listeners, so if we keep saying 10-man league or things like that, we mean 10-person league. And I want everybody to understand that, like, it's kind of like just the stupid nomenclature of things, because I know we have our female listeners out there, and they are very strong, and they have messaged me about these kind of things, so we're trying to get better about that as well, and opening that up. Here's another question, too, that I want to ask you, too. Is there a format you don't like to play in? Like, for me, it's standard. I don't like standard leagues. They're basically, it's funny because we call it standard, which is probably the least played nowadays, I feel like. Yeah. So it's more standard in the sense of like the actual scoring is very standard. Yeah. It's not the industry standard anymore. but I'm not interested. I don't play in any of them. I play in all PPR, Superflex, or these other wacky other formats. Like I'm in a 16-team Dynasty League with IDP. It's insane. I do it with a partner. We could talk about what that's like too, to have a co-owner. But Tags, is there any format that you're like, you know what, I really don't want to do this? Are you somebody who doesn't like IDP, or somebody who doesn't like standard leagues? What don't you like?
I would never play in a touchdown only league. Would never do it.
Okay.
I don't understand how some people still do it. I know it was a thing back in the past. Like you go back to like the 90s and stuff, people were doing that. I would never play in a league like that because it's just touchdowns are just so volatile. They're so unpredictable in a lot of ways. I don't like IDP. Now I understand IDP is for some people, and I have played in IDP leagues. I think that's great for someone that's trying to get a greater grasp on the game, to understand, to say that I not only know all the players on the offensive side of the ball, I also know all the players on the defensive side of the ball. But the reason I don't like IDP is because the scoring is just, sometimes the best players are not very good in IDP, and I don't think that should translate that way.
Especially the best corners, because people don't even throw their way.
They don't throw their way, exactly.
So therefore, they don't get interceptions. They don't make a whole lot of tackles. It's more kind of like those middling guys that end up getting, because they get thrown on more. Yep. So especially in the defensive backs, that's absolutely 100% true.
Yeah, and I think this all comes back to my idea, and the reason that I love fantasy football. The part I love about fantasy football is separating the skill. Creating a skill gap. And I believe that IDP is just so volatile, and you'll see players from year to year fly up and down the rankings. You won't see that nearly as much on the offensive side of the ball. So it's just more volatile, and it invites more volatility. I understand that there are some draft advantages that you could take. You could take advantages of some things in the draft because some people will overvalue IDP players. But again, it's just too much. It's just too much going on. But if you do want to further, I get it because I research this stuff all the time, for the primer, talking about the players on the defensive side of the ball. But if you just want to increase your knowledge of football overall and understand and know players on both sides of the ball, go ahead and play in an IDP league.
Yeah, look, I started a few years ago playing in a few. And like I said, to me, I like it because it, once again, opens up different philosophies, different roster construction. But you do make a very good point, which is sometimes the best players don't always have the highest stats, depending on where they play on the field and what position. So that can be tricky. We touched a little bit about being that commissioner of the league, too. And it's okay if you want to play in a league and not be the commissioner. If you're playing in a league and you're starting a league and you are the commissioner, understand this. It's a thankless job.
Yes.
The best advice I can give to you is to create what I like to call a benevolent dictatorship. What I mean by that is you take everyone's opinion into account, but then you make decisions about the league that you think are going to be best overall for everyone, not just yourself, which is also a very difficult thing to do, but make decisions that are good for the league overall. And you have to understand that nobody wants you to win either, because you're the one setting up and winning this and running this league. So the commissioner, nobody's rooting for. It's a thankless job. It's all these things, but it is rewarding if you're setting up a good league with the right people. So don't be afraid of being in control of a league either. Is there any other wisdom for people out there, Tags? I know we hit on different size leagues, we hit on different styles, things we like, things we don't. Is there anything else in terms of wisdom we can impart on the people today about finding the right league for them?
My advice is don't overdo it. I say that, and it's such an important thing for me to get out there, because when I first started, I was in one league, and then it was like, I'm going to do 3 leagues, and I was good in the 3 leagues. The 3 leagues were good because I still knew my roster in every league. I still knew which players I had, and I was still familiar with the rest of the teams in the league. But then at some point, it got out of control, and I'm in the industry, so I have to say yes to a lot of different things. And I got up to the point where I was in 24 different leagues that I was setting lineups in. I legit told people, like, oh, how you doing in this league? And I'm like, I don't know. And people would be like,
why you have my playbook at FantasyPros, so you can manage them all at the same time. Without that, you can't do it. I'm serious. You cannot do it.
Once that became a thing, it was like, it was a lifesaver. Even the autopilot mode, where it's like, if a player, I'm doing a Sunday morning show answering questions, live Q&A, and I might miss something in one of my lineups because there were so many, it'll automatically switch it out for me. But don't take on more than you can chew. Don't take on so many to the point where you're rooting against all of your own players, because it's just not fun at that point. I watch football to watch football, so therefore it doesn't matter to me. I don't even root for my fantasy teams anymore. I'm not kidding, unless it's like, the home leagues or whatever, because it's like that's the one that's near and dear to your heart.
The ones that are the home leagues, the one that has the most money in it, or for me, in the industry leagues can be tricky, but like the flex league that Sealy runs, who was just on with us this past week, I love that super flex league. It's with a bunch of people that I've worked with for years in the industry, and we have such a good rapport with each other. It's so hyper competitive. It's like certain leagues are going to take more of your focus. So understand the amount of leagues you're taking on that don't take away from that focus. Now, it's tough for people to imagine this, but like at this point, how many leagues do you even play in, Tags? Because covering football is very difficult to also then be playing a lot of leagues too. I know that sounds like a crazy thing for people to hear, but like half a dozen to 10 leagues is about, I think, a good range of leagues for some folks like us. I think the layperson, like 3 leagues is like the max you want to do necessarily. Maybe you want to do more if you're really into it, but then you start getting that conflict, like you said. So how many do you play at this stage in your life?
I think 3 redraft leagues is all you should do. That's me personally. And if you wanted to do Dynasty, you could do like 2 Dynasty leagues because they're a little less maintenance in terms of waiver wires and stuff like that. And I know that some people might be shocked to hear, I don't even care about my own fantasy teams anymore, but it's good for you. And I say that.
I'm the same way. I always say that. I care more about your fantasy team than mine, like because that's my job.
Yeah.
You know? Like if you're succeeding, then we win here.
I have to be willing to change. You know, a lot of people, what happens in fantasy football, they overvalue their own players. And I never want to be like that as a writer, okay, as an advice giver. Because if I had just one fantasy team, it might affect things. Where I have so many fantasy teams, I've cut it down. I think I got down to 17 last year, and I think I've cut it down to 14 this year. So I'm working on cutting it down because I want to be able to just not really worry about it so much. I would rather help you guys because, again, I'm able to change. Like, if I drafted a player, I don't really care if he doesn't, I don't care if he doesn't pan out. I want to give you the best advice on a week-to-week basis because that's where fantasy championships are won, not necessarily the draft. The draft definitely helps, but week-to-week management is really where it's at.
Yeah. It's absolutely key, riding those waves, those pluses, the minuses, knowing the guys to pick up. And we're going to take you through all of that in 2021 here at Fantasy Pros and do that along with you and take that journey. And I can speak for Tags as well and myself that, I'd rather see the advice that I give people work out for them than necessarily those guys be good on my teams. Like that to me is the joy. That's the reward of this business for me. And I think for Tags and some of the people here at Fantasy Pros, which I think is the difference between us. A lot of analysts out there care a little bit more about their egos and being right and wrong than about helping you. We care about helping you. That's our job, is to get it right as much as we possibly can. And hopefully we will this year with all the work that we put in for you. So that's your Wisdom Wednesday for today. Hope you find all the leagues that work for you and the right number and the right format and the right people, most importantly, because it's supposed to be fun. It's fantasy football. It's supposed to be a good time. If it's stressful, you're doing it wrong. That's it. That's my last piece of wisdom for you. That'll do it for us today. But the story of the game goes on. For Tags, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Make sure to check out our featured videos as well. Also, make sure to click that red subscribe button to get notified when we post videos in the future.